Welcome back. Today we're talking with Michael Ventura about Sunset Boulevard and The Bad and the Beautiful. And these movies came out 2 years apart. I think Sunset Boulevard came out in 1950, and The Bad and the Beautiful
Yep.
came out in 1952. And
Two.
and they're both kind of inside, in a sense, inside stories of Hollywood. They're Hollywood movies about Hollywood with big stars in them, and pretty dynamic movies plot wise. Yeah, we're gonna start out talking about Sunset Boulevard. So take it away, Michael.
Well, an important thing about Sunset Boulevard is that when Gloria Swanson, obviously, I mean, she's the kingpin of this, but Gloria Swanson was only 49 when they filmed it. She's presented kind of as an old woman, completely over the hill,
Yeah.
unthinkably old, but she was 49. And it reminds us that until, the 60s, the 70s, your 40s was middle age, and 50-year-old people, 50 plus, in literature and in films were referred to as old. Now, the median lifespan when Sunset Boulevard came out was in the 60s. Not many people lived into their 70s and 80s. And so when my mother was in her 50s, we considered her an old woman. And she thought she was an old woman. And the how can I put it? The way she's treated, the way she treated herself, was as an old woman. And so here we have a depiction of an old woman who's not yet 50, who's just turning 50 as the movie happens. And then it's Gloria Swanson, and we kind of forget who Gloria Swanson really was. She was born in 1899, and when she was 15, she made her first picture. By the time she was 16-ish, she was married to Wallace Beery. There's an incredible... They both showed up at Mack Sennett's Keystone lot in about 1916, so she's 17. And there's an incredible photograph of Beery with a black eye and Gloria Swanson, 17-ish, with a belt around her throat. You can see the buckle of the boat, right? A belt right at the center of her throat. And so they both look miserable. I don't know what that photograph is from. I haven't been able to find an explanation of it, but it is a mysterious photograph. So she makes her first films from Mack Sennett in 1916-17. And then she goes to Cecil B. DeMille. And Cecil B. DeMille, remember, she's only about 4'10" or something like that, 5'1" tops, and she's tiny, and she's quite young, and she's already been married a couple of years. The age of consent, by the way, in 1914 in the United States, and then in the teens, was 16. And so it was all legal, but there it was. And then she's working for DeMille, and DeMille puts her in all these gowns and in these lush settings, especially bathrooms. DeMille was famous for his bathrooms in the teens, and it made the bathroom a fetish among the American moneyed people. They suddenly had to have these incredible bathrooms. So it's 19... what was it? I wrote it down. 19... 1918, she's 19, and she's in the DeMille epic Man and Female. Male and Female. It was a huge film. Now, in this time, this breed of filmmakers, there was no insurance, there were no unions. It was truly the Wild West of filmmaking. And one thing you see in film after film, from the early teens into the 20s, is wild animals. Wild animals like lions and tigers and gorillas, monkeys, and the chances people took. So here's Gloria Swanson decked in a basically fancy nightie, not quite see-through, but naked for all intents and purposes, with the details left out, and the details covered, rather. And she has been thrown into a dungeon, and she's lying on the floor. On the set, there's DeMille, there's her father, who's military and has a pistol, and there's a trainer, and there's a lion trainer, and there's a cameraman, and the lighting people. A lion, a big male lion, comes down these steps, puts its enormous paw, and the paw really looks enormous, on Gloria Swanson's back, sniffs her hair. Now, if anything goes wrong with this lion, there's nothing anybody can do. A pistol isn't going to stop this lion. And the lion roars on its own. It hasn't been trained to do that. You can't make a lion roar if it doesn't want to. The lion roars. And Gloria Swanson later wrote, it was like 100 vibrators. And so here you have this enormous star at the time, and this very daring, audacious woman. And she becomes the biggest star of the 19s and early 20s. And when she's about 25, so it's 1924, 1925, she's 25, she's 26, they hold this great big celebration for her at the Grauman Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. And the whole world of Hollywood comes out. And she's sitting between Max Sennett, who gave her her first job, and Cecil B. DeMille. And everybody is, she has some big premiere, but everybody is cheering Gloria Swanson. And Gloria Swanson, amidst all this, is a really smart person. And in the limo going back to her mansion with her intimates, I don't know who they were, and she begins to cry. And she's weeping. And they say, Gloria, come on, this is a great night. What are you crying about? And she says, I'm only 25 years old. This is the apex of my life. What happens after this? She makes a couple of sound pictures when sound comes in. And they're good. Rain is a really good movie with Walter Houston. And then nothing. And then she's about 48, 49 years old. And Billy Wilder comes to her and says, I've got a script for you. And she's got the guts to do it. Even though she's going to be a kind of grotesque, she knows this is a deep character. And I believe, I don't know this for certain, but I believe a lot of the lines were hers. Because if you read her autobiography, Swanson on Swanson, or if you see some interviews of her before she died, she thought about those years very deeply. Like in the film, she mentions Mabel Normand, I believe, twice. Mabel Norman by then was an erased name. Scriptwriter wouldn't have written that. And you get when she's playing cards with her contemporaries. There's Buster Keaton. There's Anna Nielsen, who's only her hands are in the shot, but she's a silent movie actress and she makes her hands count. There's Eric von Stroheim. People from the silent era. The middle-aged people in the audience would have recognized all of them in 1950. And she deeply understands this picture. She understands that what the power of those close-ups are going to be, because in silent film, that's all they had. They had the power of what you're seeing, and that's what she trained herself to do. So I think it's among other things that it is, in terms of Sunset Boulevard is, in terms of its quality as writing, what it says about Hollywood. It's very, very interesting structure. It's more than anything else, to me, a monument to Gloria Swanson in the sense, not the way it's usually presented, but in the sense of this is an intelligent woman whose time has come and gone, who gets this second chance to make an impression on the world and knows exactly what she's doing. And has no ego about how it's going to be perceived. And goes in and creates this character out of herself. And when that close-up happens at the end, she is ready for her close-up. And she makes this indelible impression. I think it's heroic. I think it is an amazing moment in film acting, which is like no other acting there is. Because with film acting, you are on a soundstage or on location with at least 40 people and maybe 100. And everything has been set up, and the director says, okay, on your marks, people go to where they are supposed to be, and then you're supposed to be in the middle of the total scene, instantly. And when you think about it, when you look at Sunset Boulevard and think about this as a film, there's all these people on the set all the time, and here's this middle-aged woman, they would have called her that then, pushing old age, being photographed as an old person at 49 years old. And she leaps into this intensity from nowhere. This tiny, petite, person. It really is an extraordinary thing to watch, because it has that power every time. Over it's been, that movie's been around for 70 years, 73 if we're counting, and it still has that power. You say Sunset Boulevard, and anybody who's remotely conversant with film knows what the hell you're talking about. So the films of her heyday, the silent films that made her famous and which she was so good, are gone. A lot of them don't even exist anymore. They're gone. And you got to be a silent film fanatic like me to even know they existed. But there she is, at that age, making a mark that lasts. That movie is going to last. Billy Wilder directed, William Holden in the performance that made him a star, and minor parts. You're in an era, and this is true of The Bad and the Beautiful too, when minor parts were given an emphasis that, especially in 1945, 1955 kind of era, minor parts were given an emphasis that they rarely got later. So you have a lot of good lines given to people who are on camera just a little bit. So that's Sunset Boulevard for me.
Yeah, I agree about the kind of bit parts, especially Jack Webb.
Yep.
Who just acts the hell out of his little, the couple of scenes that they give him in it, and is totally different from Joe Friday. He's like the polar opposite of Joe Friday in it.
Right,
but,
right.
Yeah, he does a great job, and the girl does a good job of being kind of a modest, understated character. What you said about Gloria Swanson's age is interesting, because in the movie he says you're 50 years old, like act like it or something like that. And when he said that, I was kind of taken aback, because I was like, wait a minute, she's got to be at least in her mid 60s or something like that. But that's I don't know if that's so. I mean, I wasn't alive back then, and you were, but I don't know if that's so much of that time, or if it's just a constant in Hollywood, where.
No, it was of that time.
Yeah, but I've seen actresses all my life, like Deborah Winger, actresses that I thought were really amazing get totally dismissed by Hollywood when they hit 40. I've seen that.
It is a Hollywood thing.
Yeah.
But and it really always has been.
Right.
Hollywood, you were old. If you were a woman, you were old at 35. Yeah. Marilyn Monroe at 35 considered herself middle-aged. But it was a cultural thing.
Yeah.
And it was a medical thing, man. I mean, a lot of things people can get away with now, they died of in 1950.
Yeah. I think that, I don't know, man. At least with my generation, I think that mortality rate is going up a lot, and people have a lot more long-term, like, health problems. I also think that back then, when you're talking about mortality rates back then, you're taking when they talk about mortality rates, the child mortality actually decreases the overall mortality. We're getting into
That's true.
We're getting into statistics here. That's really going off on a tangent, but I understand what you're saying, and I think people, there was a lot more, especially when this movie was made. There's all these war injuries, and there's a lot of alcoholism and whatever, anyway. One thing I really liked about this movie was the spooky environment of it, and it's really spooky in a kind of Los Angeles way that people that live outside of Los Angeles don't really see, and it really recalled to me Twilight Zone episodes, which I always kind of see from an LA perspective, and I can look across the lot that they're showing at the studio and look out into the distance and see kind of like this hazy smog with eucalyptus trees and everything, and even like the Munsters, just that kind of LA style of spookiness that there's a real, when you live in Los Angeles and you live there for a long time and your families live there for a long time, you get a real sense of these ghosts of Los Angeles, and these ghosts of people that had really material desires, that wanted wealth and fame, and who were filled with vanity, and somehow that those desires kind of live on in a kind of astral way, and just keep kind of walking around by themselves, like.
Oh, that's great. That's a really great image.
Like
that's exactly right. That's
what is
LA.
it in Odysseus when he goes to Hades and he's hanging out with the shades, and he thinks it's Hercules that he's talking to at first, but then he realizes it's just the shade of Hercules. It's all of Hercules's like earthly desires and attachments that he's talking to. And I think that, when you're really kind of in tune and you're walking around at night in LA, and there's a kind of weird aliveness, and you can kind of feel you can almost feel these ghosts like brushing past you of all these, old movie stars, for example, or people that came out there and really wanted fame and ended up living in a crappy apartment in East Hollywood or something like that.
Right.
I mean, there's so much of that there, where these these kind of hollow lives kind of live on in a weird way there, and there's always this kind of undertone of spookiness and a kind of haunted aspect to Los Angeles. And I love how he gets that flat, and then he accidentally goes up this driveway, and then all of a sudden there's this deserted mansion there that is inhabited by an old silent. I just love that whole idea. And Bette Davis made, later on in her life, she made a couple of movies that kind of, they weren't always about an old movie star, but they were like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, is a
Yep.
Like, most people wouldn't look at that as an LA movie, but I totally look at that as an LA movie, because I remember, on a street that we lived, there would be like a house that was like unkempt, and the lawn was grown over, and there would always be like some old widow living there, and just maybe her husband died in the war, like way back in the 40s or something, and she's still like living in this house and taking care of herself. And there's so many of those people in that vast expanse of Los Angeles that are just kind of in the background. That whole aspect of this movie really got across to me, and I think Billy Wilder was kind of trying to get that across, like this kind of flip side of Los Angeles, where the vanity and the glitz and the glamour and all that is actually a really hollow thing that doesn't really have a real soul. And here's the flip side of people that dedicate their lives to that, and how they end up losing their minds in the end, because they don't have an anchor in something real. It's all ephemeral, and that's kind of what really got across to me in this movie.
It's a really good point you make, because it really is kind of a ghost picture.
Yeah.
It has the air, the atmosphere of a ghost picture, even though ghosts are basically never mentioned except for Mabel Normand.
Yeah.
It has that feel of a haunted house. The whole film does.
Yeah, and really, when like the Max von Stroheim role of the butler, and that scene with where they're playing poker with Buster Keaton and the other old time actors.
Yes.
It's like they all know what I'm talking about, and they're kind of presenting that in the film. Like they're in on what they're presenting there. And it's I'm not sure if the rest of America could watch that movie and understand what they're kind of, the inside joke kind of that they're trying to get across about Hollywood. But
probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not, because there you had Buster Keaton and Anna Nielsen and Eric von Stroheim, and they'd been really big,
right,
just 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
25 years ago, they were really big.
Yeah, that's an
And
interesting thing about it too, is that it wasn't that long ago that those people were really big in the movie. But when you watch the movie, you're like, oh, those people are like ancient. Like that was
exactly.
50 years ago or 60 years ago. Yeah, that's an
Yes.
interesting thing. Yeah.
So the bad and the beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I looked up. I had to look her up. She has the best lines in the film, and she comes and goes. Elaine Stewart. She's the sexy girl that Kirk Douglas
Oh. Yeah.
has in his mansion. And here and there in the film, she just shows up and says a great line and disappears again. And people don't do that in films anymore. They don't. You won't see a minor actor in a minor part get the best lines. Working in film now, and Jazz and I have been working on a script, and the producer's working on it, and blah blah blah. I got stuck in this mess all over again, and they don't want to give that moment to a small role. Yeah, well, can't the star say this? Can't da 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 da? And it if you step back from it, it's very comical. But here's this Elaine Stewart, somebody that I've seen the film several times, and you couldn't have tortured that name out of me before last night. I went, okay, who is she? And she was in a few movies in the 1950s. That's who she is. And she was kind of sultry, kind of curvy, and she knew how to throw those lines around. They work. And she knew how to be the bad girl in a few pictures. This one, more than any other, is the only picture that she ever did that has a name. And she shows up when she shows up, and she steals the scene. They don't let people do that anymore. But she steals the scene. There's Kirk Douglas, there's Lana Turner, and the one with the line that you remember is Elaine Stewart, being sultry on the staircase. But Elaine Stewart aside, this movie has always tickled me because it's, who's the hero of this movie? The producer. Not the writers, not the actors, not the directors. If Hollywood is going to make a film about Hollywood, the hero has to be the producer. And the studio head. The people who are usually the most rotten people on the lot. But they get to be heroes in this really very good, very well written, very well-etched characters. I mean, Dick Powell and Lana Turner and Barry Sullivan, really good actors. Kirk Douglas is probably the most underrated great actor of cinema. And then Walter Pidgeon with that voice of his being the studio head. And just because of his voice and his bearing, you're looking at, a moral man. And when you combine studio head with moral man, it just doesn't make any sense. But there you get the studio head. He is the center and the fixture and the guy who makes sense and the guy who is loyal to everybody. He's everything that no studio head ever was. And you have the ruthless producer who's ruthless, but he does a lot of good for all these people, even though he gets this guy's wife killed. And he abandons this woman. But it's all to the good. And if I'm making fun of it, it's because it is absurd, and at the same time, it really is a Hollywood movie about Hollywood, and in its inside-out way, it's very honest. It's how pictures get made. It's how people try to be, because the most confusing thing about Hollywood is that it's sincere. I find that now. I find that was true 20 and 50 years ago. I mean, I got into the business in '78. They really are sincere in what they think they're feeling or what they want to feel. And they really are completely vicious in the doings of it. You know, when I was really in the business, the proverb was, maybe still is, a friend in Hollywood is somebody who'll stab you in the front. And it was true. Yeah, I had producers like I won't name names, but a good guy. He got me a lot of work. I basically have a pension because of him. I wrote several scripts with him, and if he was gonna shiv me, he just said it straight out.
Yeah.
You know, I wrote a script. He called me up out of the blue. He was gotten a job at HBO when HBO was new, and he said, we want a 1-hour script, kind of a teleplay, you know, circa 1950s, but we want it about Che Guevara and Fidel Castro. And I got an idea right away. It should be on the day that Che Guevara leaves, their last conversation. Che Guevara is going to Bolivia. It's a doomed mission. He knows it. Fidel knows it. Fidel's just trying to get rid of him. And Che Guevara knows it, and he accepts his fate. And that's the basic thing. And boom, 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 I had a deal. I had enough money to live on for a year and a half. And then, so the script was done, and HBO doesn't want to make it. And it was funny because the liberals thought it was too conservative, and the conservatives thought it was too liberal, and so Jack and I thought it was just right. But then they were going to get Andy Garcia to play Fidel, and Andy Garcia is super conservative, and he was going to change the script to make Fidel a real villain. Now, I don't agree with Fidel or Che. I don't agree with violence, and I respected them for their bravery and their dignity, but I don't agree with them. And so it wasn't a matter of that, but Andy Garcia was going to make it a whole completely different thing. He was going to ask for a whole rewrite. And I said that to Jack, and Jack said very simply, we will be very happy to sign Andy Garcia. In other words, my script was going to get thrown under the bus. Don't even think about it.
Yeah.
And nobody ever made the picture. But that thing, that way, is really alive in The Bad and the Beautiful. You really get how Hollywood sees itself. Not Hollywood, but how Hollywood sees itself. And that's a kind of authenticity, sincerity that's in the picture. Everybody in the picture knew it was bullshit, but it's how Hollywood sees itself. And for that, it's really valuable. It's really valuable.
Yeah, that's interesting. What you say, a good friend is somebody who stabs you in the front. Yeah. What I think Vincente Minnelli is a pretty amazing director, and that really came across to me in this movie. And it's produced by John Houseman.
Yes, I'm glad you noticed that. Yes.
Which I looked into that, and I had no. I just thought John Houseman was a character actor, but I guess not. He actually had a pretty big career behind the scenes in Hollywood. But yeah, it's a great movie about how somebody who you ostensibly think is a giant asshole can bring changes into your life that or obstacles that look like obstacles, but in the end help you to grow. And I think that there's a lot to say about karma and reincarnation and how people's different souls kind of collide with each other through different lives over and over again. And in one life you might screw that person over, and then the next life they screw you over, and you're kind of form a bond that way and keep on colliding over eternity. And yeah, it's very well acted.
That's a great way to see this picture.
Yeah.
That's a really great way to see this picture. Souls that have kept colliding with each other over eternity. I love that.
Yeah, and yeah, that seems to be the theme of the movie. I mean, it's the setting is Hollywood, and it says a lot about Hollywood and how and a good depiction, kind of polished, but as far as how relationships, the dynamics of relationships in Hollywood, it seems pretty realistic to me. I wasn't there,
yep.
But like you said, the way you described it was pretty good, and I believe that. But there's a whole other kind of theme of human relationships that goes beyond Hollywood in this movie. And I think the relationship between him and Lana Turner in the movie is really interesting, because that whole thing about him being her father being kind of his mentor. And there's a whole kind of very Sunset Boulevard-esque scene where they go to that guy's old house, and everything's falling apart, and then she's up in the attic for some reason. Like she just was just
really
hanging out there the whole time. And yeah, that was that really reminded me of Sunset Boulevard a lot. That scene. It's a great scene too. And and Lana Turner really, it's interesting how she is this big sex symbol, and like I find her really pretty and everything, but you really see how kind of squat she is in this movie. She's when you see her like in a full body shot, she just kind of looks like she's built kind of like a hotel maid in a sense, you know. She's
well, she's tiny.
Yeah, I guess that's it.
I mean, when she walks through that set.
Yeah.
And the director Vincente Minnelli knows exactly what he's doing.
Yeah.
He puts her in a set that's huge. It's a sound stage. And she's in this kind of bulky bathrobe. Right. And she looks like she's 3 feet tall.
Yeah.
I mean, she looks even tinier than she is. She's tiny. She can't be more than 5 feet. She's got to be less. You know, most of the actors in that time were fairly short.
Yeah.
And it had to do with apertures and films and cameras and stuff that I
really
quite get. But you know, John Wayne was only 6 feet tall. He looked like he was a head taller than anybody. And she is really little, and Minnelli puts her in situations where she looks like almost a miniature adult.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And she walks into that sound stage, and you go, "Oh my God!" And then she only comes up to everybody's shoulder. so you're putting this big star into this kind of perspective, and in fact, most of the female stars of the 30s and 40s in particular were really small. The teens too, actually, but they were small. I remember Betty Davis being interviewed, and when in her age, and she says, and the interviewer, she comes out. I think it was Dick Cavett, maybe not. She comes out, and he says, "You're wee," meaning small.
Yeah.
And she says, "I've always been wee."
So you're
and yet
saying...
on the screen, it's different. If you see Lana Turner in The Postman Always Rings Twice with John Garfield, nobody's really taller than them. But they're both. She's like 4'11" and he's about 5'2".
Really?
But they look normal in relation. Yeah.
So you're saying that they look for people like actors like that on purpose?
No, people didn't get as tall. In World War II, the average GI was 5'6" to 5'8".
Yeah.
And taller than that was rare. Like a person we consider, like 5'10", 5'11", you were too tall to sit in a fighter jet cockpit.
Huh.
You had to be a bomber pilot. If you were James Stewart, you had to be a bomber pilot. You couldn't be a fighter pilot. He was tall. And like that, the average height of a man was about 5'8". The average height of a woman was about 5'2". My mother was 4 feet 11 and a half inches, and she wasn't considered very short. She was just kind of short. It was nutrition. It was God knows what, but people didn't get that tall. And in fact, for most of human history, people were shorter. When I was on a gig in England with Hugh Hudson, who recently died, rest in peace, the director, in a film that was never made, he was actually Lord Hudson, and he had a mansion, not like on Masterpiece Theater because it was much more dusky and windy than that, but on the edge of the moor in Devonshire. So that's the moor that Sherlock Holmes tells you not to go out upon in any circumstances, and the oldest room in there was the kitchen, the hearth room. The hearth was huge, but I'm not tall. I used to be 5'8". Now I'm 5'5", because I'm old and shrinking. But to get into the kitchen, you had to bend down. Even if you were 5'6" or 5'5", you'd have to bend down to get through that door, because the people who built it were short. They never got much above 4'10". But in any case, this is a fascinating digression, I hope. But in any case, she looks tiny. It completely deflates the Lana Turner, the sex goddess.
Yeah.
When she walks through that studio, you are not looking at a sex goddess. You're not even sure what you're looking at. I wonder what she thought of that shot when she saw it in the screening room. Because this was made toward the end of her stardom.
Yeah.
She made a couple of more pictures in the 50s that were fairly famous, but she made them as kind of an ex-sex symbol. Marilyn Monroe had taken over that. Nobody could be with her, and so Lana Turner was really, in 1952, her real stardom days were almost over. That would be her last big movie.
Do you think that the whole thing with her daughter and Johnny Stompanato and that whole scandal that kind of had an effect on her career too.
Oh yeah, sure. She was, she was a gang mob, for Christ's sake. She was the real thing.
Yeah.
And was it she or her daughter who shot the guy?
I think it was her daughter that Johnny Stompanato was trying to rape her or something, I think. And yeah, she didn't shoot him, but her daughter did. Or Johnny Stompanato was beating Gloria or Lana Turner or something.
Because I know that Lana Turner testified and it was the greatest performance of her life.
Yeah.
And she did it really well. And she was tough. I mean, it comes through in her performance. She looks tough.
Yeah, it comes through in this performance. Yeah, and it's almost like an adolescent girl in this, like a tough adolescent girl in this movie. Yeah.
Well, it starts off when you just see her feet dangling from the rafters.
Right.
She's in these tennis shoes and she's talking kind of high voiced, and it gives the impression of an adolescent girl until you actually see her, and then that impression never quite leaves.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was an old Hollywood joke that applies to this movie, and it was about an agent, and not Jim Wyatt, but the guy who was boss when Jim Wyatt was my agent. But let's use Jim Wyatt's name; he wouldn't mind. And the joke went, and you could say it for several agents, so it didn't go to one particular person. And it went, I was in the elevator with Jim Wyatt. Hello, he lied. and that was really a snapshot of Hollywood. You were going to get told whatever was convenient to be told, no matter whether it was true or not. As Eve Babbitt wrote, it's hard in Hollywood to tell the real true illusion from the false one.
Yeah, I was gonna say that the sets in this movie are really amazing too.
Yes.
And in particular, that set where they first encounter Lana Turner, where it's like a room, but it's set up to look like the inside of an old ship, right? It's and I just wondered if they like built that entire thing just for the movie, because the sets were so elaborate, and I was just really impressed with Vincente Minnelli's direction in this movie, and the whole way it was put together. It was really pretty fabulous, and really kind of one of the zeniths of filmmaking for that time.
Yes,
as far as technically, it was very, very polished, and everything was right in place. Yeah. Not that Sunset Boulevard isn't that great or whatever, but or Billy Wilder isn't a great director, but yeah, this was pretty amazing.
Also in that era, the back lots were up. All the studios still had their back lots.
Yeah.
They didn't go down until the late 70s, and the back lots were mostly, when they weren't in use, they were just hanging out there. They had so I wouldn't be surprised if that was a backlot mansion that nobody had used in a while, and all they had to do was stick some stuff up on the walls. Those backlots look like that.
Yeah.
I walked through them. They were just about to be told when I got to Hollywood. And I walked through the MGM backlot, and I walked through the Burbank Studio and Paramount backlots, and even on the Fox, and there was all this stuff hanging around from old movies.
Yeah, it seems like Fox kept theirs up a little longer than the other guys, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
At least in my memory, they did. Yeah.
You drove through the Fox the main Fox entrance on Pico, and to your right and a bit ahead of you was a New York City L station,
right,
elevated train.
Yeah.
And if you looked hard, it wasn't in proportion. It was smaller, but it was built to look, to be photographed from, like in the distance down the street. And the first time I drove through the lot, I almost hit the booth because I was staring at that thing. And then the first time I was ever on the Paramount lot, this is '78. Their Old West
right.
Set was still up.
Yeah, I remember it still being up. When we would go there, I remember that old lot still being there, at least part of it. Yeah.
No, but Bad and the Beautiful does catch all that. They catch both the romance and the funk of Hollywood.
Yeah, both movies I think are pretty good. Do you remember any other movies from that time period that are about Hollywood?
Not offhand. No, I don't think I do. The Bad and the Beautiful and Sunset Boulevard were the Hollywood movies of their day. And the Barefoot Contessa, kind of. The Barefoot Contessa has a lot to do with Hollywood.
Yeah, I was trying to think of later movies about Hollywood that, and I think there was a few in the '70s, but only one that I could really think of was S.O.B. Yeah, and we couldn't find that one. But I remember one that I saw in the mid '80s, I guess, called it was called Movers and Shakers, and
called what?
Movers and Shakers with Walter Matthau, and it totally it was a sleeper movie. I think it was about an agent, like Walter Matthau plays an agent in Hollywood.
Yeah.
I only saw it once. I went to the theater by myself when I was like 10 years old, and for some reason went and saw this movie. And I thought it was really good. And I've never heard of it or seen of it ever again. I couldn't even find a trailer for it on YouTube. But
you got me. I never heard of it.
Yeah. But that was back when they still made B movies to show in the theaters.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, well.
Okay.
Why don't we stop there?
Okay.